Thank you very much. It's a real pleasure that you invited me to give this talk here, because it's a topic quite dear to my heart here. As you can see below, I'm based in Munich, in the province of Rhaetia, in the Imperium Romanum. You're on the other side of the world. Hadrian came to our province in the winter of 121 to 122. I'm sure he would have traveled to Australia had he known and had the means to come. He was a man of immense curiosity, for sure. So I think you can talk for hours about his personality. That's not the topic for today, though. Today we're talking about the Auri for Hadrian as Caesar. Quite an interesting example where I think coins, so numismatic evidence, can really help us understand both political events, but also here the portraiture, so can guide classical archaeology. What's unique about coins is, besides the fact that they, except for these Auri here, come in large numbers. So you can look across different dyes, across different emissions, and you can do almost statistical, you can do statistical analyses on data that you do on coins, as you know. Whereas the portraiture in other means, like marble, you see here on the left-hand side, are in small numbers, and you can't be quite sure whether this is someone you know or someone you don't. Is this Hadrian? Is this not Hadrian? And if you look at the one on the left, you wouldn't think he's Hadrian if you see the classical portrait of Hadrian. Coins, on the other hand, they have the name on it. They're official documents, all of them, whereas other sculptures could be private, could be provincial influences, etc. So I think coins from the beginning of classical archaeology have been useful to identify portrait types. But we are now in the lucky situation that through the new media and the huge databases of coins, we can do research. Also AI, I think, can help with dye studies that weren't really possible before. So let's dive right into this one now. You'll later see that this order here, the marble on the left, strange looking fellow, the person in the middle that has, you can just see HAD, Hadrian, looks quite unusual. On the right-hand side, you see probably the most expensive Hadrian there is. That's a famous Cistercius with a really wonderful portrait style of the classical one that we know from him. All right, let's dive right into it. Portraits of rulers, a few words up front. We still have them. I mean, I traveled in the Baltics last week, and they barely use coins there anymore at all. But they actually do have coins with political impact, like they did coins for the Ukraine, and they're very close to the Ukraine war, and so it's very dear to them, and they have that there. But it's not that usual anymore that you have rulers. Monarchies do. I think in Australia you still have. Did you have coins with Charles, or did you stop with Elizabeth? You still have Charles. All right, good. So it's a good example here. This is a UK coin, though. So they're still there. And then in the 20th century, they were. You see Franz Josef of Austria on the left-hand side. You see Charles now, 21st century. They're still there. Not that many anymore. Like in Germany, we have on our coins, we have past rulers, you could say, chancellors, etc., that are no longer alive that are shown, but not live, well, politicians, leaders. Anyways, it's a long tradition that is still alive on coins, and I'm very happy that it is. Now, Hadrian, as we all know it, there's 3 examples of Hadrian here. My head is just to show that this Hadrian is huge, the one in the bottom down there. That's the famous Hadrian colossal statue of Sagalassos in what is today Turkey. And when I was able to see it actually in the Museum of Burdur, it was very impressive. And when I was here taking this picture, it was at the airport in Istanbul at a special exhibition. If it's still there and you have a stopover in Istanbul International Airport, try and get into that museum. It's quite amazing. And of course, this one is amazing. And it's a classical Hadrian. You have these curly frontal hair. You have a short, well-kept, short, full beard. And you see that these coins here are reflecting that very well. So you could at first sight think that Hadrian, as we know it, there wasn't much change in, certainly not in coin portraiture. There's different busts, the early more heroic one, often with a sword belt, sometimes with kind of heroic nudity. Sometimes just the bust here, sometimes draped with something. That's not really the point of this presentation here. other than that it says Hadrian on it. Very difficult to see any change between his third consulship and Pater Patriae later on. He doesn't age, it's always the same kind of. But actually in his first years, a lot happens there. And so the analysis here is really going into these first months, you could say, days. In 117, it all becomes standardized once he is back in Rome as emperor in summer 118. Just a few thoughts on the family here. These are coins actually from the Roman coin book that you mentioned mainly before. So you have Trajan on the upper left, his uncle or great uncle and guardian. They both come from southern Spain, so they're both provincials in a way, Roman senatorial provincials. He was married to Plotina, who plays a major role as we later on see. And his sister, Trajan's sister Marciana, and her daughter Metidia, with her daughter Sabina, who was married to Hadrian, show that these adoptive emperors, not the topic for today, were really, well, they were adopting because they didn't have male heirs, but they had female relationship. And so this is kind of a female line that goes through these emperors, the adoptive emperors, other than, of course, Nerva early on, who was forced to adopt Trajan, who was controlling the troops in Germania. But anyways, that's another story here. So this is the setting that he was in. Curiously, everyone must have expected that young Hadrian, who went through a good military career with several legions, was with Trajan in the Dacian Wars, quite active there, was governor of Pannonia quite successfully, had quite a military career and a political career, but seemingly was never really adopted formally. And that becomes important in a way later on with this. Now, the final campaign of Trajan, whether he wanted to be like Alexander the Great or not, up to debate. But anyways, his Parthian campaign to Parthia was his last one. Initial success, massive troop concentration. So vacillations from all over the empire were sent with him to the east to defeat Parthia. And he was initially very successful there. He defeats the Parthians and reaches even the Persian Gulf, standing there probably dreaming of India. And so he receives in early 116, it seems, the title Particus, and there's a variety of coins that show him as he occupies and goes into Armenia, Mesopotamia, and all of those areas down there, and gets multiple imperator acclamations. Very, very successful initially. And you can see on this map here, thanks to, I took this from the web here, you see down on the left down where I took it from. So I usually try to say were coin photos that I haven't taken or images didn't come from myself, but came from others here. So you see Armenia, Assyria, Mesopotamia, and going really, really very far east. Quite a successful story, you would think, but it didn't quite turn out that way. Because the Parthian campaign really ends in chaos. Probably the supply lines were overstretched anyways. On the borders, troops that had been sent to the east were now suddenly not there anymore. And so various populations across the borders or even in the borders were using this opportunity. So there were numerous uprisings, both in the newly occupied territories in Judea, Egypt, other ends of the world. And the army, in the end, they had to retreat. And Trajan, elderly Trajan, fell seriously ill then after the failed siege of a desert town, Hatra, and withdrew sick to Antioch in Syria. Uprisings in Dacia then forced him to send the Syrian governor, Quadratus Bassus, to Dacia. And Hadrian, in his place, was appointed governor of Syria at the end of that year. And so he becomes, in that way, of course, Trajan was the high commander, but Hadrian was the commander of the 3 Syrian legions and massive auxiliary and other troops, the biggest force in the Roman Empire at that time, even though, of course, they were a bit in disarray from the retreat. Not a real retreat of all the territories, but nonetheless that was to come. So Trajan here, you see that he goes from the very far east. He moves to Antioch on the Mediterranean, and these asterisks, the red ones, show uprising of Judean or Jewish populations in Dacia, trouble in Mauritania, trouble in Britannia, everywhere trouble. And so it was a very difficult, delicate situation for the empire, a dangerous situation. Now, Trajan's, I call it tragic end because I think it is tragic that this military man, this great emperor, kind of, well, had to end his career in this chaos and defeat, and got really sick. So his health deteriorated rapidly. Now, the major sources, Cassius Dio and the Historia Augusta, are not saying exactly the same things, and they're biased by political views, certainly on Hadrian afterwards. So Dio says Trajan suspected that he was poisoned, but more likely he just simply was sick, suffered a stroke that paralyzed part of his body. That becomes important because maybe he wasn't even able to write or sign anymore, and he had edema all over his body. At the end of July, beginning of August in 117, Trajan then finally left Antioch for Rome. And not quite clear why. It was thought that maybe he wanted to celebrate a triumph in Rome, or he wanted to formally adopt Hadrian in Rome with the Senate there. Not quite clear. But anyways, he didn't make it in the end, as we'll see. So he left Hadrian with the high command of the army in Syria. Again, the biggest concentration of troops in the whole empire. And Trajan, with his wife Plotina and Metidia, they traveled by ship along the coast of Asia Minor towards Rome. And he died, it's about 3,000 kilometers on the way to Rome from Antioch, and he died about after 2 days' journey with these ships in Selinus on the southern coast of Asia Minor. So now the plot thickens here. You see, very, very far away, a long distance, takes weeks to travel, even with a fast boat. Now, the transfer of power I had mentioned before, there was never a formal adoption while Trajan was active and in the years before, even though it was expected, probably expected. So it was not a well-planned adoption, according to the ancient literature, hostile as they may be in the literature. And so these historical sources, these dramatic events are partially contradictory. And so there is this suspicion that maybe Plotina just arranged this, and Trajan was already dead behind the curtain. And so his weak voice, Hadrian, was maybe made up by her, or she apparently signed the letter for the adoption letter as well, but maybe Trajan wasn't able to do that anymore. And so not quite clear what is there. Maybe we can learn a bit more about this when we go into numismatics now. But firstly, the timelines, likely as they are. So an adoption letter might have been signed in early August, maybe 7th of August at Selinus. Plotina signed, and it would have taken weeks to travel to Rome. That's down at the bottom there. The adoption letter, however, reaches Hadrian in Antioch 2 days later, 9th of August, and that's the assumed date of Trajan's death, if he really died there. And I think there's no reason to doubt it. And so Hadrian learns 2 days later, and the troops immediately proclaim him as emperor, and Hadrian counts his first day of his Dies Imperii with the 11th of August. Odd, but what can we say is that the Trajan's butler, Phaedimus, died on the 12th of August, apparently. He would have been a witness of the events, and that caused a lot of suspicion, but we can't really say anymore from here. So from 2,000 years back, almost 2,000 years back. Now we come to these very rare aurae of Trajan. There are aureas of Trajan which are issued for Hadrian Caesar. So the reverse side of those coins is for Hadrian. And that makes sense because the issuer would have been Trajan that issued those coins. Since the early 19th century, there was one unique aureus of Hadrian that was a Caesar was known in the Cabinet des Médailles in Paris, and at that famous theft of 1831. It was one of those gold objects that disappeared, and it was melted down by the thieves, never to be found again. But some sulfur casts survived. One in the British Museum, which is in the literature, but was apparently lost. Anyways, I wasn't able to get hold of it. And the second one in Berlin, I was afraid it might have been lost as well, but the colleagues there were kind enough to find it for me, and it's on the website now of the coin cabinet in Berlin, and I have the image here. And they're pretty good quality, these casts. And so we know about this coin quite a lot now through these sulfur casts. And then two more auri of the same dies became known since the year 2000 in the art trade or the coin trade. Unfortunately, no provenance. We don't know where they were found or came from. And no knowledge of them really before about 2000. One was last fall in an auction, and the other one about 20 years earlier. A lot of debate, obviously, if these are real or not, genuine or not, already with that unique aureus. But I think we can really be quite convinced that they are. And I was even able to make a metal analysis of the one from last fall, because it was in Europe where I could test it. So this is what they look like. The sulfur cast on the left-hand side, thanks to the Berlin coin cabinet. And so you see at the bottom, you see Trajan. Not unusual. We'll come to that in the analysis. And on the upper side, you see Hadrian Caesar. And in the middle there, the larger one, that's the one from last fall. And there's a smaller image they took from the auction back then in the early 2000s of the third coin, whichever way. You can't really put in order. They're all identical dies on both sides. Very rare. The political background of these really rare auri of Trajan for Hadrian Caesar, I think they make political sense before August 11th. Unless you really want to overcomplicate things and assume that this was kind of a commemorative issue done maybe decades later for this, but political sense it would not have made. Now these troops, these coins were, the gold coins were certainly important for the troops, donations for the troops. They were also important for the senatorial class, maybe, so for the upper class, you could say, in the empire, as an audience for those coins. I would think in this crisis situation, I assume the most important target group here must have been the troops in the east, who were later then also fed with other coins on the adoption theme. I will come to that. And so because the aureus with an inferior title like Caesar seemed to make only political sense before he became Augustus, which was August 11th. So you would normally immediately, to really clarify, you would issue as many coins as you can, which Hadrian did with him as Augustus, and immediately send these around in the empire. So the time window for a meaningful Hadrian Caesar coin would have been quite short. Now, after August 11th, these mass emissions, I call them here because they're really quite large, of Hadrian begin. There's other topics on these early coins as well. Were initially a curious error, mistake, or was it on purpose? He continues with the titles of Trajan, the victorial titles, including Particus, Dacicus, etc., which Hadrian never had. So either this was an error in the mint, or, well, we can't really know, but this was fixed after a while. But these initial issues were issued in Antioch and in Rome. So you see here examples of both. And we'll come to the portraits later, because these are also unusual portraits of Hadrian on these coins, besides the heroic bust. And on the reverse, very clearly, handover of the power, adoptio, as the theme of these initial coins. Now let's look closer at these auri, and I'll use the images that I took of the one that recently came last year, because I think there's a lot to learn from them. First, if you look at the Trajan coin here, and there were a lot of analyses of these. Mr. Burnett did that most recently. There were searches for die overlaps, the die studies that Mr. Beckman did, and so there's various ways that these coins were analyzed when the data, especially of that second coin, came around. I go a little bit deeper here with high resolution images, but this here looks like a very smooth, very professional, very usual, obverse of a late Trajanic aureus. Both fields, lettering, and so if this had been a normal aureus at the period, it would have continued on the reverse with other titles, particles, etc., and then one of those reverses that were usual at the time. Now, not on this coin though, because here you see this one. Heroic bust, all right, well, the early Hadrians have that as well. And then you have the title here, Hadriano Traiano Caesari. So it is for Hadrian here. And he does have an unusual beard if you compare it to the later Hadrians that we've seen before with that short, full beard. The hair is a little different as well. And if you note here, there's lines in the fields, we'll come to that you sometimes but rarely see on Auri. And here it's almost like there was a kind of a support line here, where maybe with kind of circled around the coin that you knew where to put the letters, and not quite smoothed here. Anyways, let's look at it. So only 3 surviving coins of the same die. They speak for a very small emission. It can't possibly have been a lot. But then again, all we get, I did that for military diploma, where we know the number of troops and the number of surviving military diploma. It's probably 1 in 1,000 or less that survive. So with coins, it could be very similar here. I mean, there've been studies done on that. Now, the inscription or the title here, the name Hadriano Traiano Caesari, is a bit curious. Not that it's for Hadrian, but the order is a little bit unusual. You would have thought more like Caesar Trajanus Hadrianus with an adoption. All right, bit unusual here. The die axis is not exactly as it was usual in Rome at this time, not 6 o'clock, but 7. And it seems it was difficult to judge that on the sulfur cast, because I'm not sure how they merge the 2 sides to it, but it looks like from the 2 surviving coins, it's not 6 o'clock, more like 7 o'clock. Of course, as I mentioned before, this obverse die is a typical late aureus obverse die of Trajan. By the way, the metal analysis that I was able to do with this coin showed nothing unusual on the gold content. It is kind of a gold content that is usual for late Trajanic coins. All right, so no die links were found by Beckmann, which is unfortunately, maybe in his upcoming publication we'll see some there. But anyway, so this obverse die wasn't used with other reverse dies, as far as we know. Here again is more of a larger image where you see those unusual structures in the field. This is just a scratch here, but you see this here. You can also see a little bit clearer the beard of Hadrian. It is a mustache, clear mustache. It is sideburns, but it's not a full beard. The chin appears to be free of hair here. So it is a peculiar beard form, not unheard of or unseen in young Romans. He wasn't young at that time anymore. He was 41 already when he came to power. And the hair is not exactly these waves like we've seen before, but it's a little bit difficult to say because of the laurel here. Okay, so these unusual technical features are not really matching with the regular Roman mint quality, you would say. Auxiliary lines, hatching appears in the East, but rarely seen in Rome. And no such lines on the regular, it's called regular obverse die of Trajan. I would see this as an indication in two directions. One, it could indicate great haste, a rush in the production of that reverse die. And it was likely, and I think Burnett came to the same conclusion, combined with a regular, probably already available obverse stamp with a portrait of Trajan, which could have been available for these ongoing mass emissions for the Parthian campaign troops. The question that came to my mind here then is, well, where was this die made for Hadrian, Caesar? Was it really a Roman mint coin, or was it maybe a coin that was not even issued there, but was issued in Antioch? And I think there's strong arguments for Antioch. I'm aware that Dr. Wojtek, Professor Wojtek is not really assuming that there is Trajanic gold production in the East. I'll meet him next week. We can discuss. But anyways, this could have been an exception here, or maybe there was actually gold and auxiliary mint traveling with Trajan to this massive campaign and these massive troop masses in the East. So the portrait, let's look a bit closer to the portrait here. It is actually, I find the style quite good. It is unusual, not the usual portrait, but whoever made this certainly was quite a good artist. It's for me, it's a convincing portrait of a young man here. And so he has this curly hair, annulus hairstyle, which is popular, as well as the other, this wavy one that we know from Hadrian. This annulus hairstyle has been around since probably Nero's time in young fashionable Romans. It seems to merge here, the mustache merges with these whiskers, bare chin down here, nothing here. The new portrait of Hadrian, because it was a new one, there seem to be no precursors known to us. This is the first, would be the earliest coins where Hadrian that have been coin portraits created for Hadrian on coins. So since he was on site in Antioch, they saw him, an artist, a die maker would have seen him. Such a new design was possible directly in Antioch, but not in distant Rome, weeks away. And certainly they had talented die cutters, Greek maybe as they were, available as the local Syrian coins of very high quality in Antioch, for example, the silver coins of Trajan and also later of Hadrian show. I think as Hadrian was directly on site in the East, an artist could have seen him directly, a die maker, and he would have been the decision maker for that. He could have been asked. It seems more likely to me also with these technical features that this coin was minted actually in the East. Now, there is another thing that makes this, another coin that makes this more likely. We'll come to that. And that's this one here. Now, this coin is not three of them known. It is actually unique. It's a tridrachm of the city of Aegiae across the bay seen from Antioch or from the harbor there. And it is also a coin that has, the images are poor or not as good as these were photos from the early 20th century, from the early 20th century, indeed, from an auction where they didn't show these images large enough. And I got this image now from Hallenberg company, kindly. Aaron was not able to find a better resolution coin for me there. So this is all we have. I have no idea where the coin is, but you can see that also sideburns, mustache merging with the sideburns, and a free chin. It seems to be the same beard form that we saw on this aureus, which is interesting because this coin here, this tridrachm from Aegiae in Cilicia, is dated. It is dated to the Caesarian area there, year 163, which ended in November 117. So this coin is dated essentially before August. It could have been minted shortly before August 11th, for sure, but the latest date for that would be November 117. This was an observation made by Florian Heimann in 2007, who published this here. I analyzed the portrait type further. The reverse of these coins, by the way, shows Alexander the Great. And from the title, if we go to the next slide here, extremely rare, known in 2008, only one specimen. It is the port city, as I mentioned, same portrait type without heroic bust. And the inscription here follows more the usual order. Caesar, Trajan, Hadrianus in this one here. And he's not titled Augustus on this one. So this is not a coin as Augustus. He was still Caesar. And as I said, we have it dated. So I think taking this coin together again, it strengthens a lot the case for that all these coins were made in the East, closer to where Hadrian was. When Hadrian learned about the death of Trajan, he actually traveled towards Plotina and the body of Trajan, and he would have come by Aegiae for sure. That's on the way there. And so maybe this coin was then issued to honor Hadrian and honor him with the title that he had at that point. I cannot imagine a provincial town like Aegii omitting the title Augustus on this for the emperor had he had that already. So I think that makes it even stronger that this was something that happened in the East. As I said, adding all of that, all of the above, I think it was likely a mint in the East that minted both the aureus and, of course, also the coin from Aegii. Now, finally, how does the Caesar portrait fit to this new Caesar portrait fit to Hadrian's other portrait types? This is, again, an image you know already with that wonderful Sagalassos coin. It's difficult to imagine, actually, that they brought this massive marble head all the way to Istanbul. Luckily, it didn't fall or was damaged. It's huge, must have been weigh tons. But anyways, so here is another interesting coin here that we need to talk about in this context. Hadrian's earliest portrait type on coins actually doesn't appear on coins. On his earliest coins, it appears on auri, very rare auri of the 129, 130, etc. So late in his reign, when he was much older than this. Now it must be Hadrian, because that's what is written here, Hadrian Augustus. These coins are with Pater Patriae on the reverse. There are die overlaps actually with reverses to this obverse die and the regular with the full beard, as we've known. So here we have him, which puzzled a lot of the classical archaeologists and numismatists alike. Now, Delta Omicron is a term that was coined, if I may use that jokingly, by Dr. Struck in the 1930s in his analysis, very good analysis of Trajan and Hadrianic coins. 1932, 1933, I think. And so he realized that this was an unusual juvenile portrait. Not that many coins, but a few dozen, I think, appeared in the market in the last 25 years when I looked in coin archives, which I find a very useful tool, or all of these are very useful tools. Now, if you look at that portrait here, he does have a mustache, doesn't quite merge with the whiskers. And some of these coins actually have no mustache at all. They just have these sideburn whiskers. But again, the chin is free of hair. So very similar in a way to the beard that we've seen on the Caesar coin. But the Caesar coin, maybe, as this is directly the mustache merging, a little fuller the beard. Now this here looks like a young man. Let's not forget, on Caesar's coin, he was already 41. He looks younger to me, but we can't really know. And then the hair here is not that Grados hair, that wavy hair that the late portraits have. We'll come to that later on. But it is actually a curly hair, which puzzled people a lot, because this annulus hair is obviously, as we know, popular, Marcus Aurelius, Commodus later on. So what is going on here? And we don't really know. All we can say is there were portraits on coins of Hadrian that are juvenile, unusual, and they came when he was much older. So maybe that's, I think, is what a lot of numismatists think, and classical archaeologists, I agree with that full-heartedly, is that this must have been the reuse of an older portrait style of Hadrian. Are busts that were found, marbles that were found that matched that absolutely as well. Here is one that was found at Hadrian's villa in the territory of the Tivoli near Rome. Curly hair, this curious beard. Actually, it goes a little bit underneath the chin, but the chin itself is free. And here he doesn't seem to have much of a mustache at all. So one of those examples. These are now seen and also called Delta Omicron after the nomenclature of obverses that Struck invented in the 1930s. So Delta Omicron, something to remember. He looks younger. I think this is a portrait that is showing Hadrian younger than the Caesar portrait. So this would have been before. We have no coins. We have no datable sculpture. The only thing we have are empty pedestals, like in Rome. Sorry, in Athens. There were portrait sculptures for him that are lost, and all we can say there were issued for Hadrian, but none of those survived. So this likely these were, well, this is really what young Hadrian looked like. So the juvenile type, I described that to you already. We can jump the first or skip the first bullet. Discovered on this small group, later identified in sculpture. There's only a handful of sculptures known, and I'd say a few dozen of coins. So this would have been maybe in his time as a governor in Pannonia. Maybe it would have been as archon in Athens, where he was selected. No of this empty statue pedestal. But we can't really know if this was just a reuse that Hadrian had initiated for, I don't know, for his friends, for this emission. We don't know. We cannot know. Now, this is here what I identified a few years back as type 1, not really taking the Caesar coins into consideration, Imperial type 1. He has this annulus here and the partial beard, and you've seen these coins before here. This is from Antioch, and this is a denarius from Rome. They all have these adoptio reverses, and you see here on this coin very nicely and clearly, you see free chin, sideburns, mustache, free chin, sideburns. And the hair is not quite wavy. Again, not so easy to differentiate because of the l'Oreal here. So this here would be what I called type 1, Imperial type 1. And now we have to widen that because the Caesar coin is exactly the same. Mustache, sideburns, free chin. So it appears actually that whoever invented this one here as Caesar, this type was then continued in the early Augustus coins, which I think is quite interesting. In Antioch, we have examples, and in Rome, there's also Alexandria coins, but there the image is the thing is a little bit more messy because there seem to be coins that have no beard at all in his first year. And it's difficult to differentiate because a lot of the Antioch coins are quite worn, and so you don't know, was this just worn off or not? But you find this beard type also in Antioch, and you find some that have no beard at all. Maybe they didn't know what to do initially. That's also an option. But I think this here is a clear evidence that Caesar coins are really the type 1. So this type was designed likely in August 117 AD for the Hadrian Caesar coins, and then continued. Now, the next step here, and was used in multiple mints, for a 41-year-old person. It was not a juvenile portrait at all. And we've seen before, and I purposely showed that to you, Emperor Franz Joseph of Austria, he had this beard until he died, right? So until a high age, reached a high age here. So it's a matter of fashion. It's not a matter of age. It's not a juvenile beard. It is a fashionable beard that he had Hadrian had until he reached Rome, probably in 118. Now, late 117 to mid 18, there are coins that seem to still have curly hair, but a more full beard. And this here is a marble bust that is discussed as one of those. Curly hair, full beard, looks very, very Hadrianic. Was discussed by some archaeologists as saying, can't be Hadrian because he has curly hair. I think that's not an argument that is really that strong. Mrs. Yucker published this one first. So I think it could well be a Hadrian, this one here. I think actually it is a Hadrian. And this is a later coin of Aegii at the end of 117 of the new era. A little more hair down here. Still quite similar. And here actually you see that he has the title, title of Augustus of these new emission coins here. Now this one has been in use before Hadrian reaches Rome in 118 AD. And I found examples with the coins consul designatus for the second time, and also some consul second. But here most of them are already with the wavy hair, which are then the classical ones that we know and that didn't quite change with his age, except those Delta Omicron coins, of course. I've assembled all of those into group 1, and that's the Gradus hair with full beard, and it's ageless until Hadrian's death. This is the one that was most got most attention from the classical archaeologists. And as a matter of fact, more than 200 portrait sculptures of this large group are known. Max Wegner listed all of them known at that time, I think in the 80s. There's also a good publication from Ms. Evers from 1994 on Hadrian portraits that is worth looking at. So they classified these in 7 types, not always to differentiate even if you stand in front of them, because there's different subtypes of the forehead hair lock schemes. But you have Stazione Termini, Vatican, Chiaramonti, Termin Museum, Padulament, Baie, you have Tank Bust Imperatori, you have type Busti, and you have Tarragona as the most recent one. So there are different types. There was actually a fantastic exhibition at the villa last year, at the Tivoli Villa, where they had the name-giving examples of all of them there, including also the Delta Omicron that was found there. And I so went to, as many of probably did, to all of them, took pictures of all of them from all sides. And when I stood in front of them, I said, yes, this is it. And the moment I left, I said, how would I describe that type? They're not easy to differentiate even in sculpture. If you have all of them in a room, on coins, it's probably impossible because you can't see the lock patterns that well. And so until Hadrian's death in 138 AD, no evidence of aging in his portrait. Much of what I told you today, it is published in the latest edition of the Jahrbuch für Numismatik und Geldgeschichte, which I think you have in Sydney, don't you? I thought I saw in your in a picture on your website. I saw these light blue next to the desk there. So that is on there, but you can also download it down here from academia. And so just thank you for your attention. This is